You'll be whatever you want. A knight in shining armor, or a magic spell caster. Roll the dice, hoping for a 20 might get the one. The clash of grids can turn the tide of the battle. The dungeon master has saved the tale for us. Let's start this journey together. Ignite the fire and cast your spell. Trust your swords straight into your foes. We have the strength to overcome all the challenges ahead. Embark on adventures, endless journey beyond reality, into the darkest dungeon that waiting for us. Pushing forward and level up. We'll finish what we have started. Blast of Beats.
Hi, welcome to Clash of Crits. I'm your host, but today I'm not a Dungeon Master. Today we are going to be interviewing a very special guest. If you heard our Patreon content last year during the holidays, we made a one-shot with Anime 5e, and today we have the publisher of Anime 5e, Mark MacKinnon from Dyskami Games. So Mark, say hello.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's great to meet everyone.
Yeah, and it's great to have you. We're really excited. We were really big fans when we played the Anime 5e. As I just said, we on our Patreon, we did this like one shot of it. It was we tried doing almost like a parody of like animes together, where it was a magic girl slime adventure to go to save the day. It was hilarious.
Yeah, it sounds wonderful.
But let's get into this. How did Dyskami start?
So I had a previous company back in 1997 when it started called Guardians of Order. And that was where I published my very first game, which was the BESM, or Big Ice Small Mouth at the time, first edition, which was my first RPG. And that was the company, 97. It ran until 2005, 2006. At that point, after having quite a successful run, in the end, things didn't go quite as well. There was some mismanagement on my behalf. There was the exchange rate between the U.S. and Canadian, because we're a Canadian company. And so when the exchange rate changed, even if our sales stayed the same, and sales didn't have to drop, for our income to drop, because once it's exchanged over and all of our employees were Canadian. So that was my first company. And when that went out of business, I looked elsewhere and left the industry and did some other things. But I was always... I've always been a gamer. I've always been a game designer, and I was drawn to the board gaming industry at that point. And so when I came back in 2013, I thought, well, it has been, 7 years and I've been on the sidelines, but I'd really like to get back into doing some designing. And so came up with a board game idea and decided to publish that. But of course, because the previous company, Guardians of Order, was out of business, I formed a new company, Dyskami Publishing. And that's how I got started in doing that. And then since 2013, I've expanded out mainly into role-playing and going back to my first love and my first creation of BESM, now in its 4th edition. And from there, it expanded out to several other games as well. So yeah, it was really a love for the game that drew me back into the industry. But since I was a little kid, I was designing games that are riffs on Monopoly and Risk and whatnot, because it's in my blood.
So you say that you've been making games like Risk and Monopoly. What kind of games did you end up actually making?
Yeah, so I mean, I was into, it's pretty well whatever caught my interest at the time. So when I was in grade 7, I was kind of into BMX biking, and so I came up with the Monopoly version of BMX biking with a couple of changes to it. But in the end, there wasn't a lot of originality. There was just the desire to create. When I saw something that I wanted to do and it didn't exist as far as I could tell in the industry, I would create something for it, and that's really how BESM started, where I really fell in love with a show called Ranma 1/2, which was my favorite anime of all time. And I fell in love with it, and I said, I want to role play this, but there was nothing out there that really did exactly what I wanted. So I thought, I'll just create my own role-playing game for Ranma. And I was just going to do it for my friends and my gaming group. But after I started the design process, I realized, wow, with just a few changes, I can actually expand it not to be just Ranma, but anime, all of anime together, of course, which is, a massive undertaking, but, hitting the major tropes and the major cliches of it. And so that's where BESM First Edition came from, was me wanting to create a game for Ranma 1/2 that didn't exist. And so, see a need, fill a need.
Man, I haven't even heard of Rama 1/2 in a long time. I used to read those back when I was a kid. Yeah, it was an awesome anime. I guess tell us about BESM then, since it's been kind of like your origin, like your start with it all. How would you explain it?
Yeah, so at the time when I was designing, I was going through what I'd call a very rules light phase. I mean, Amber Diceless role playing was my game at the time, and I just loved all the stories and the narrative aspects of Amber Diceless. And so, even though I started with Dungeons and Dragons as most role players do, I had the current experience was Amber. And so when I decided to create BESM, I thought, well, okay, Amber has 4 stats. Can I make it even simpler? Can I go to 3 stats? And, listening to how I wanted to play with Ranma, but also all of anime, knowing that there's a certain Eastern kind of philosophy about the spirituality of body, mind, and soul, where like there's the harmony and the balance of making sure your physical, mental, and spiritual are all kind of balanced together. That's where the tri-stat system came from, and then from there was just a straight kind of pick and choose point-based character creation, which I have always thought was just a great way to build characters. You have a certain many points and go and buy what you wanted to acquire for your character, rather than a class and leveling based system. And so that was really the kind of how BESM, or the tri-stat system, which it became later to known as the actual game engine, that's how it got started from there.
Wow, yeah, and I can definitely see, because when we did the Anime 5e Chappie, he ended up having when he did, it was the broker class, I think you were
yes.
doing, and we were doing only like a one shot, but so it was. It was going to be like very combat heavy, things like that, and the broker has a lot of more like narrative side, talking to people, things like that. So, but since your Anime 5e has that system where you can, instead of like gaining like the feature, you have the ability points instead to put into and everything like that. I thought, like how you were saying, how when you were building your stuff that you have the points to add to it, and I could see that when we did Anime 5e, it ended up making him being able to play the character completely through an entire dungeon that we did without him having to like fall behind and everything like that. It was awesome.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, specifically with the broker, but with all the classes, with Anime 5e, whenever I decided to tackle that, I said, well, Dungeons and Dragons is such an iconic game, and it's such a good game for what it does, and mainly it's dungeon crawling, of course. That's where the heart of D&D is. And I thought, well, what if I can take aspects of the Dungeons and Dragons system, but then don't restrict it to just being primarily combat and primarily dungeon crawling? Like, how can I open it up and expand it out using a kind of a point-based foundation, so that you can get characters like a broker, who's really almost like an NPC class in a traditional D&D. You wouldn't have your magic shop merchant, or your collector, or your people who are not combat oriented. You wouldn't have those in your dungeon crawls typically, but with a point-based framework, it allows you to customize things a little bit more strongly than traditional D&D class and leveling basing. And because of that, I thought, well, Anime 5e could be good for doing adventures that aren't just about the dungeon. And yet, if you wanted to have a heavy combat game, you could still do it, but I wanted to offer stories that were a little bit broader and than the relatively narrow focus of core Player's Handbook.
Absolutely, and I think you've actually nailed that down, guys. If any of you like Chappie, do you want to talk about your experience when you were playing the Anime 5e?
My experience was super fun. I loved all of the characters, the simplicity of actually being able to make the characters, and we kind of like randomized it a little bit, didn't we?
Yeah, we randomized our race and class when we did this, because we wanted to make sure that we had like a reach of everything.
Yeah, so I had a blast playing it. It was fun. Like he said, being the broker I kind of felt like I would have been left out, kind of thinking about it. But once we started getting into like the actual gameplay of it, it was a blast.
Oh, that's amazing. And it's great to hear experiences that are diverse and aren't just about the same old. I mean, I love D&D dungeon crawling as much as anyone else, but sometimes I'm looking for a little bit more diversity in my games, which is why I even created Anime 5e to begin with.
Yeah, Droppa?
I honestly like to say kudos on like your beginning of how to create your character, the point system, because just like how Psycho said, we randomized it, and I think I was basically the DPS. I was just
Yeah.
I put all my points into like attacking a crit,
yeah.
and I love the critical attack. So if I roll above this number, it does this more damage. So it can be like real anime cutscene, one hit, bow, game over.
Yeah, certainly going with, I mean, as its core foundation, Anime 5e is a 5e game. That's what it's based on. But to accompany the I guess the wide diversity in anime, upping the power scale, or at least the potential power scale, because you could have it as tight as you want and as low powered as you want, but the option of making it a little bit more broad is to account for those wild and wacky shows that we all love and we see in anime, and that's one of the things I wanted to blend the best of anime and Dungeons and Dragons together, and I think Anime 5e turned out pretty good because of it.
Yeah, when this is Oso here, when I played, I enjoyed it all the way. I played a Kodama ninja because like we had randomized everything, and I thought it was really fun just going through everything, seeing everything that was there. But the more that I looked at the book, what I can't wait to play next, because I'm 31, so it like pushes me into like the things I loved as a kid. The Archfiend reminds me of like gargoyles and Goliath from like the show, and
Yeah, of
like
course.
playing like an Archfiend Shadow Warrior, I think would be completely badass, and I would just love to play that through like a long campaign.
Oh, that sounds great. Yeah, certainly with the Archfiends, as you mentioned, as character class, one of the things we wanted to play with a little bit more was the things that kind of aren't traditional. So people not like tieflings, which are mainly humans with horns.
Right.
It was what really visually, but like actual playing someone that looks like a full-on demon and isn't just medium size. So we played with some large sizes in the core Anime 5e for the Demon Naga, for example, and then the Archfiend's actually huge. So they're standing, 30 feet tall.
Right.
So you're not going to be going to the inn and have your traditional start of the adventure where you're standing in an inn and someone walks in and asks for help. In the end, there are some real disadvantages with playing a character size that is so far outside the realm, but I thought, well, why not? Why couldn't you play a character like that? It would be very interesting to play the super large, or on the other side, the fairies. So you're looking at you're maybe a foot tall or 6 inches tall, like something on a much smaller scale. Because in the end, it's all about the characterization, not about the specifics of the numbers, but how do you get into these characters, and what stories can you come up with based on these non-traditional D&D characters? And that's what I love about the creation of role playing. It's just so much potential for going beyond the limits of what 5th edition is.
Yeah, I can even say that, funny enough, and people who listen to the show know that we're all big weebs, like we're big anime people, and actually how we started with Dungeons and Dragons was because me and Chappie, we were first playing Dungeons and Dragons with my brother, who ended up like falling off, and we wanted to do something else. And the way that we did it is that I ended up, because we're all big into anime, I ended up kind of creating almost like an anime D&D thing to get our other friends on, and that's when also Kuma came. That's when Drop a Crit came. So I really wish that we knew about this when we were doing the stuff, right, guys? Because it would have made things make a lot more sense.
Way easier.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm glad you know about it now.
Yeah, no, for sure. If we would have had this, 7 years ago?
Yeah.
8 years ago, I feel like we would have never even got into anything actually Dungeons and Dragons related.
Yeah, honestly, I feel like this would have been just our core book, and we probably wouldn't have jumped into any other like system or setting ever.
Nice. Yeah, the diversity is systems great. I like trying different things. At the same time, when you find something you like, you want to keep enjoying that. And, that's why I go back to the Amber Dicel system, which I fell in love with back in the really early 90s when it first came out. And, I still play that any chance I get. So the familiarity of what you like and you want to keep playing that is great. I still play D&D. But at the same time, having these new things that kind of scratch an itch that haven't been scratching that way before is also great.
So when you're creating these systems, like with BESM and Anime 5e, what is the process that you go through when you or maybe your team and everything like that are making these things? Like, what are you looking for?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's interesting because every game is going to be a little different. Like, for example, when I was creating BESM back in 1997 and the subsequent editions, I was going for a very particular thing that I wanted to create an anime game. And so how do I create something based on the almost like a medium that I wanted to play, versus Anime 5e, which of course takes what I consider the best of BESM and the best of 5th edition and merges them together. And so from that point of view, I was going from a different philosophy. It was, okay, here's an existing game already. How do I take the game that I created and integrate it to expand and improve upon what might be there in its base, rather than doing something wholesale new, which is what BESM was. And so every game is going to be a little different. When I created the Sailor Moon role-playing game, for example, that was all about making sure that adhered to the license. And so it's going through and painstakingly watching every episode over and over again to make sure that when a particular character does a particular attack against a particular person, it's going to work or not work based on reflecting what was in the anime series. And so every game, role-playing game that I create, is going to have a different philosophy. Sometimes there's a new one that I'm working on right now, and I had an idea of a mechanic as kind of like the core concept, and I wanted to play with this mechanic. And so the game, actually, the setting and the genre, all that came from the mechanic. The mechanic was the first thing, and so it's expanding out from there. So hopefully that'll be something I'll come out with maybe 2027, 2026, depending on how long it'll take to get it written and play tested. But every role-playing game, it depends on what the philosophy was and what the kernel of inspiration was. Sometimes it's to do something in particular, sometimes the mechanism, and sometimes it's adhering to what was already there and then building upon it.
Yeah, it's really interesting as like creators when it comes to like content in general, that like some small thing can spark such a huge idea. Whether it just be like a small game mechanic or even maybe an aesthetic of some sort that can just spark something to create a whole, whether it be world or system or story from things like that. And that's one of the things that I just love about this like field, when it comes to content creating like this. You mentioned, just out of curiosity, when it came to like having to try to fit everything within like the Sailor Moon aspect of it. And I am just curious on how often something like that has had to come, like whether it be like in like the Anime 5e that you've done, or even with like BESM, how has any kind of like licensing actually been an issue when it came to creating these things? Like just example, the OGL debacle that came up for Wizards of the Coast. Like, did something like that ever impede on any of your guys' creations?
Yeah, typically, I mean, with the OGL, it's interesting you brought that up, because I know that a lot of people, the publishers, were playing directly in the OGL field with, integrating it really heavily. So when the whole problem came up, it didn't affect our plans as much, because Anime 5e kind of, yes, it uses the OGL as its base foundation, but we deviated very strongly with the point-based foundation. So other publishers would have been much more affected had that gone in a direction differently than it ended up playing out. But for us, it wasn't as much of an issue. With the licensing, of course, anytime we've done licenses in the past, and I've worked on numerous anime properties, we've had non-anime games that we've worked on, live action movies, novels, and all of those, it's really important to me to have the application of the game system reflect the realities of what's happening in the license. So if you can't play the characters or the stories that are in the media property you're dealing with, if you can't reflect that with the system, then I think it's behooving to change the system a little bit, which we've done in the past. We've had numerous licenses based on the TriStat system, which is the BESM game, but we've had to make tailor changes to the different ones to make sure that the licenses are reflect appropriately.
Interesting. Yeah, it seems like it could be take a lot of work, though, like in general, making sure that everything's in its place. But when you are making that kind of stuff, it brings up another question, as you were talking about how you might be releasing something in the next you could be releasing something within the next couple of years. When it comes to the testing of all that kind of stuff, is it like an in-house thing? Like, do you guys like do like a whole like campaign, or do you guys just do like one shots of testing the game out? How does it how do you like send it out to people, possibly like third parties, to give it a try? What is your guys' process when it comes to fleshing that stuff out?
Yeah, it does depend on if it's an expansion or core rules. Something that's an expansion, a lot of it could be play tested mathematically if there's some issues. If you're just adding on, for example, couple new classes or some new races, then some of them is going to be more intuitive. But when you're creating a new game, it's actually a multi-step process of playtesting. And this is true whether it's a board game, which I do, or whether it's a role-playing game where you have to run it yourself and make sure that it works and go through several iterative processes of that. But then you go to the next stage, which is kind of like your friends, having them run it and see what they say with different groups. And sometimes I may be there as an observer, but not playing, but just seeing how they interact with the system and kind of watching it as almost like a fly in the wall to see how that goes. Then you have the full-on blind play test, where if you have some people that you trust in the end, unless you're a large company like Wizard of the Coast or maybe Paizo, we don't want to just throw something out there for anyone to have. We will want to be selective, and there's a couple of our what I call more of our alphas for Dyskami, or our super fans, people that really understand what we do and the philosophy behind my approach to it. And so sending them a copy of the rules and saying, hey, would you mind running this with your group, and then providing some feedback. This is something that we've done in the past, and it's something that I will continue doing forward as well. Being a micro company, we don't have the infrastructure to run the large open, more beta play testing that maybe DC20 is going to be doing and Paizo and Wizards have done. I'm not at that level. We need to be a little bit more tight with what we're doing. And in the end, if you do it through enough iterative processes, you're going to end up having a good play test.
How big is Dyskami?
There's just two of us, so I'm the kind of the everyman in their role. I mean, technically I'm the CEO, but I mean, I do a lot of the head kind of the game design of the systems, as well as all of the administration part of the company. And then Robin Flanagan, he's my creative director, and so he's responsible for kind of determining in many ways, the non-system future of the game. So a lot of the settings, the characters, most of the writing goes through Robin. And so I kind of joke that I'm the system guy and he's the text guy, and that's kind of what we do, is the two of us. And then of course that we'll use outside freelancers for writing and art as needed. But as I'm a fairly particular person, and I have very high standards when it comes to writing and how things are done. And so it's being small, I can't just publish anything, and I want to make sure I retain a fairly good control over what I do, just because time is very limited when there's just the two of us. And so we kind of have a relatively small production schedule compared to a larger company, but I think
yeah, for sure. I mean, I gotta say, I was expecting to hear more than two. The fact that it's just the two of you is actually very impressive with the things that you guys have put out.
Yeah, thank you.
So
yeah, and interesting, in 2024, we were releasing 18 products between just the two of us, which is just phenomenal. That was partially just an alignment of schedules and whatnot, and we don't normally going to do this many products a year. But yeah, it's been a really productive couple years we've had, and I'll be scaling that back a little bit as we work on core rules, for example, core systems. That takes up a lot more time than doing an expansion. Ignoring the page count, just the design work itself takes a lot longer to do one 300-page core rules than three 100-page expansions. And so we'll pull back as appropriate to make sure that we're supporting the games that we can, but also coming up with new stuff.
When it comes to these things that you guys have spent so much time in, like with BESM and Anime 5e, just once again, general curiosity, since you guys have done this so much, do you guys have like favorites, like favorite classes or builds that you guys have done or anything like that in these systems?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm running an Anime 5e game right now in my hometown for friends and a couple of family members as well. And there's definitely things that I love. I mean, in the end, if I can play up the anime tropes well, I mean, I love slimes. Slimes not necessarily even as a player characters, but as background NPCs. I think communities of slimes is a fantastic anime trope to have in Anime 5e. And so I certainly enjoy that. And then we're exploring some of the cultural behind the classes and the races of the Greys, which are our aliens, the standard Greys type aliens, and the Tech Knights, which are kind of like a group of, let's just say, paladins who kind of inherited this armor that came down from space, and they get this armor, and then they become part of an international organization in the fantasy world of being protectors, kind of again similar to paladins, but has this slightly different bend to it. And so getting into the culture of slimes and greys and techniques, as well as the physical, the ability scores and the points of it, I find wrapping that up is very interesting when it comes to creating characters and campaigns.
Yeah. I can see that. I mean, that sounds. I'm also like kind of like a paladin. I'm someone who like goes towards like those paladin-esque style characters. So that sounds really, really fun. When it came to these kind of things, because we talked a little bit about like the point system and things like that, it becomes when it becomes about like balancing this kind of stuff out, right? And I believe in some of the Anime 5e book, it says like, hey, your stuff can be really crazy, but just make sure it's really crazy or it can be scaled down. How long did it take for you guys to like go about that kind of system with like these point systems that you guys put into it, to where power levels can become crazy because it is anime, and then there's like that differential?
Yeah, the real advantage we had when I was designing the Anime 5e is the foundation of the almost 30 years of BESM that I had from that, back from 1997. And so the idea of here's all these different things you can do, and there's going to be points associated with it. The inherent balancing of those have been underway in BESM first edition, second, third, fourth. So a lot of that was integrated into Anime 5e, which didn't require kind of a build from scratch balancing method. That was the philosophy we took with Anime 5e, was take an existing idea and framework that we've already built in our anime game for BESM, and then integrate it. How do we bring it in so that we start assigning points in the Dungeons and Dragons game? So what is a proficiency bonus worth? What's an ability score worth? And start assigning points to ensure that it balanced with the rest of the framework of being able to move quickly, or having a state change so you can change into a gaseous form or liquid form. And all of these different elements had to balance, but a lot of that framework was already done in BESM, and we just had to make sure it worked well with Anime 5e. So we had a bit of an advantage that we were working with two already established systems, and the real work was then the harmonization of the two systems to make sure that it created something that was inherently logical and cohesive and made sense for the players, without being too much and going too far outside the realms of what 5th edition players were used to. Now, Anime 5e, no doubt, goes beyond what some 5th edition standard D&D players want, especially if they want dungeon crawling, and that's their thing. Anime 5e really doesn't balance out specifically for dungeon crawling. It was intended to balance out for broader range of characters. And in the end, if you're going to be very specific with, I want to get the most powerful fighting type person I can, then part of the problem of going a little gonzo with Anime 5e is if you optimize your character, you can create something that is like incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, when we were going through it, it was definitely something, like we said, Chappie was able to convert the broker into something feasible for like the dungeon crawl that we did, to where he did really well. I think we ended up giving him like a magic weapon that helped him really well, and it became a whole. He didn't fall behind in any kind of way.
Yeah, it was a great time. I can't wait to actually run another couple games in the system.
Oh, that's wonderful. I do encourage you, if you are going to look at more, some of the expansions we've done since the core rulebook really add on some interesting flavor. I mean, there's our Folsavia's expansion, which it gets more into the world. We created a fantasy world where every continent is a different type of fantasy. So there's a dark fantasy continent, there's a steampunk fantasy continent, and a heroic fantasy. There's low fantasy. And we did this and created in new races and classes to go along with that. So certainly if you're interested in more traditional kind of within the D&D realm, then yeah, absolutely take a look at Folstavia. And the one that we we're just waiting for it to ship across the country right now and arrive at our warehouse, and we're going to fulfill our Kickstarter within the next couple of weeks. This is Beyonder Worlds. And so these are the things that are beyond fantasy. So we have, if you wanted to play Anime 5e, but you want to play Cyberpunk, we have a Cyberpunk framework for that. We have a mecha fantasy framework, a science fiction fantasy framework, and urban fantasy. So if you want to play on Earth, and you want to play with not like Vampire the Masquerade, but something more like that, where you have urban myths and monsters, then Anime 5e, here's the framework on how to do that. That's an expansion that we have coming out very shortly as a way to go beyond just fantasy, which is what traditional D&D is. But we said, well, we have this great system of 5th edition D&D, and then we have these point-based options add on top of it. There's not a lot of difference between adding on a point base for magic and a point base for technology, and that's how mech can come about. So this is something that if you're looking at expanding out, we have a couple of great expansions that can go beyond just the style of fantasy. Hey, if fantasy is your thing, then the core book will do everything you want it to.
Oh yeah, I mean we're definitely a group that expands out entirely. It's funny that you brought up Cyberpunk because we just recorded actually a Cyberpunk like miniseries for our things as well. So all those different kinds of things is definitely something that we would look forward to for sure. When you're like bringing up all this stuff and like how you guys are doing it, do you guys have like a specific goal that you guys are trying to hit as you're growing Dyskami?
Yeah, that's a great business question. And the easiest way to answer is to say that as a 2-person company, we could be extremely agile. So when you're a huge corporation, you're planning often years out, and you have gigantic engines that move forward. With a 2-person company, it's kind of whatever catches our fancy. And there was an opportunity that something came up, a license that we haven't announced yet, but we'll be announcing in the new year. The license holder approaches and said, hey, we have this thing. We kind of like to get an RPG for it. Can you submit a proposal? And this was something we're like, well, we weren't planning on doing this, but a company's asking us to, and it would be, might be nice. So we submitted a proposal and got the approval for that. And so we ended up dropping in something that was not part of our multi-year plan, but because of the agility that we can have as a small company, we can react to opportunities. And so there's a couple of products that I have planned for next year. There's some things we're working on, and the year after that, and up to 2027. And there's some overall philosophical goals of where I want to go, but at the same time, things change. Where if we produce a product that I think is, hey, this is a great product, and there isn't really a market for it, that people aren't purchasing it, then that will tell us, oh, maybe that wasn't such a good idea to go with in that direction. And the converse is also true, that sometimes I may throw something together that I thought is a bit of a lark and see where that goes. And in the end, if it's quite popular, then that's something to jump on and do more of that. So it's, there's some overall goals we'd like to have. I'm not interested in being a 30 or 40 person company. That's not where I am right now. When I was running Guardians of Order, we got up to 8 at one point, and that was, at the time, that was what I wanted to do. But now I kind of like where we are now, small, agile, and kind of do what I want to do as opposed to what just the market dictates.
Yeah, I like that. I actually agree with that a lot because, the world changes, whether it's interest or things, and then sometimes these large companies take forever to play catch up, and working with as you say that you guys are agile. I think that's a really good concept to make sure that you're always there, you're always ready to figure something out when it comes time for it. So I think that's actually a really cool thing about you guys.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, one of the Kickstarter we have going on right now, Soldier Loon, which is our Sailor Moon / Magical Girl RPG that we have. That was actually written several years ago, and I had shelved it because it wasn't the right time. And I thought, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to write it and then put it out. And things happen with the pandemic, and other things happen with Anime 5e. And so it was always one of the things that, even though we've worked on this, I'm just going to put it away, and then eventually it'll come out when it was the right time. Well, the fall of 2024 was the right time to release it on Kickstarter, and we're really happy with how it's been performing. Even though it's been sitting quite a while on our computer, it was that having that agility to react when it was good for our company.
Yeah, so you said it's like a Sailor Moon. It's like a Sailor Moon concept, right? So can you tease it a little bit?
Yeah, so as I had mentioned earlier, so I had the Sailor Moon role-playing game that I released in 1998. That was my first licensed product that I had, and that was compatible with BESM. And at the time, it was an incredibly well-received and very popular game. There wasn't, I mean, going back, it wasn't pre-internet, but it was at the earlier stages of the internet, and so there was not as much information out there, and certainly a lot of the underground anime community was, exchanging sub VHSs, for example, or dubs just weren't as common. But doing Sailor Moon at the time was great, and something I always thought it'd be great to revisit at some time. A few years ago, back in I guess 2017, 2018, we did reacquire the Sailor Moon property from Toei Animation for licensing, but it was for board games, specifically board and card games and dice games, and we did 3 different games from that we're quite happy with. And the role playing game was something that I had strong interest in doing more of. So working on the Sailor Moon role playing game and kind of submitting a proposal to Toei Animation, and they decided to pass on it. It wasn't something that they felt they had the resources to put into a role playing game for approval processes. Keeping in mind, when you submit, say, a board game to a company for approval, there's significantly less text than a role-playing game, which could be 50 to 100,000 words. It's a lot more investment on a license holder to look at a role-playing game and approve it than a board game, which is primarily images and a little bit of text in the rules. Right. So at the time, they just decided that no, it wasn't something that we could move forward with the Sailor Moon role-playing game, the revised version of that. And so we thought, okay, that's great, but I mean, I've done this work and this foundational stuff, so why don't I make some changes to it and do almost like an homage role-playing game that we called Soldier Loon instead, and releasing that as people who might have been fans in the past of the Sailor Moon role-playing game that I wrote, or maybe they're just general either newer fans or fans of magical girls in general, and that was something to give them the tools to show them that you can do this with the Tri-Stat system with some slight variations from what's in BESM to be customized a little bit more strongly to a magical girl series. And so that's what we ended up doing as a box set, which you have NPC book, and you have a rule book, and you have some dice, and you have a game screen. So it's these types of box set Tri-Stat games, which this is the 4th one. I did 3 earlier ones, and I look at these as almost like your Friday Night Murder Mystery box sets, where it's designed to you get some friends together, you open a box and get playing right away, rather than spending a lot of preparation and often hours creating characters and sitting down and running through the whole process at the beginning of a role-playing game, which I certainly love that time. But sometimes you just want to jump in and get going too, and that's what these Tri-Stat box sets were intended to do, is the get together and start playing. Don't spend all your time designing, just start playing the game.
Yeah, I mean I grew up watching Sailor Moon, so it's something I would definitely be interested in, and I can definitely probably say that now at any time, and the rest of the guys can probably say Magic Girls are like in.
Yeah.
So like,
I mean, I'm pretty excited for like what you have in store. Like, I love anime, and my gateway anime to get into it was Sailor Moon. I mean, I don't know where we got the VHS tapes in my house, but I just started watching them, and I'm just like, oh, this is awesome, and like, that's what pushed me into watching anime just in general. And I think that's why I like Digimon so much, because the transformations are kind of the same. Like, glowing in light and spinning is the way I think you should transform in any anime. But
look, I can't wait to try, just like you guys. Like, my mother got me into anime. Her favorite anime was Sailor Moon. If you're hearing this, Mom, I'm about to be a magic girl. Chia.
But it's definitely been that is a hell of a tease. And also about the licensing thing, I think we're excited to hear that whenever that gets dropped, you'll let everybody know what you'll be working on. So that sounds really exciting too. It sounds like you guys got a lot of things going, a lot of things working out, and it's really great to see and enjoy and play.
Yeah, thanks. At any time we will have 5 or 6 different projects on the go. Some of them are expansions, but other ones are games. And, there's some really interesting design space that I'm interested in playing in. I mean, yes, I financially, I have to make some money. I can't produce products that are always going to not sell. It just, I have an employee, and as well, of course, it costs money and my time that, if I would just spend my time with my family or another job somewhere else, for example. So games do have to have a financial viability, but Kickstarter did change the playing field a lot in terms of you could have a minimal viable product, something that you don't need thousands of purchasers. You can now survive on hundreds of purchasers, which of course I think our games are wonderful and everyone should play them, and we should have thousands of people or millions of people looking at our stuff. But realistically, if we have 500 people that are interested in something that I create, then it allows me to think, well, I can create something interesting that I'm passionate about, and if there's a small number of people that like what I do, then that's something that's viable enough to go forward on. Anime 5e was a smash hit for us. There's no doubt it was the most successful product I ever did, and it blew away any of my expectations. I certainly never considered how much we would do from that, but that wasn't the goal. Wasn't money first. It was, hey, I want to do something interesting with Dungeons and Dragons and these point-based flexible options to allow people to create characters more in line with what they want to play as opposed to what a book tells them to play. And so, I got to do something what I wanted, and everyone loved it. And other games, I might produce something that I wanted, and no one really cares. And in the end, it's, as I said, that goes back to that being small, lean, mean, and we could produce stuff that I think a design space I'm interested in. What is possible? What can I do? Not what do I have to do?
Yeah, I mean the whole aspect of what can you do and what have to is, those are two completely different mindsets, and so that makes you think differently. But being able to have your choices, I feel like even if we give a quick example, the video game creators like Larian Studios, the ones that made like Baldur's Gate, those people were like, what did we want to create, not what we had to create. And look, it created something amazing. When you don't feel all that kind of like pressure given whatever kind of situation you're in. And I feel like with you guys, with Dyskami, it works in a similar vein to where it's something that you wanted to have, and because of that, it's become successful for it.
Look at Dyskami is a professional hobby. It might not exist as an actual term, but I think of it as a professional hobby. It's not business first, and it's certainly not a hobby only, but it's, how do I approach this hobby, this thing that I really enjoy doing, but how do I approach it from a way that's going to be financially viable as well? And so that's how I approach Dyskami.
Yeah, for sure. And with that whole creative ability, around like with what you guys are doing with Soldier Loon or any more Anime 5e expansions or BESM expansions, are there any kind of special like animes and or shows or things that you're doing that are giving you like fresh inspiration to like for anything that's going on at the moment?
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, probably that give me the most inspiration for a lot of my game design and the philosophy that I'm behind is lit RPGs. A lot of the books that I'm reading, although I typically listen to audiobooks rather than reading. And so lit RPGs think of them as a book where you're reading, it's a novel, but the characters are either from another world or they've died or they're in a computer simulation or whatnot. And so the main characters have game stats. And so that's the RPG aspect, the lit RPG. So it's not a choose your own adventure style book. It's not a D&D role-playing book. These are characters that have progressions and they work to increase their stats and increase their skills or their magic or whatnot. And these novels are just incredibly diverse and so interesting. I think it's kind of taking over the fantasy novel realm right now. If I was to go to say Audible and look on Audible, it's like, what are the biggest audiobooks right now? Yes, you're going to have your traditional, your Game of Thrones and your Harry Potters. I mean, even though they've been out forever, still tons of people download these books all the time. But lit RPGs are quite popular, and then whenever a new one comes out from an existing series, it's almost always going to be a debut at the top because it has so many fans, followers. And so the lit RPGs, it allows me to hear the narrative aspect of different game ideas. And so the characters are going through, they're going to be progressing in whatever game mechanics that they have, but it's in the context of not a role-playing game, but actual as a novel. And so the ideas that I get from this, just it really is so creative. And that's probably my biggest inspiration right now are lit RPGs, which I've been following for several years. And I've just, ferocious in my appetite for them. I tried to power through as many as I can because it's just so much diversity. It's like mixing my favorite things, which are like reading and words and language, mixing that with games, and that's what I've been mainly going really quite heavily on.
It's interesting that you bring up lit RPGs because I've been seeing them everywhere recently. And someone who is an audiobook person myself, do you have any? I've been thinking about it, trying a lit RPG. Do you have any that you recommend checking out?
Oh, there are so many I'd recommend. I mean, it's funny because there are literally thousands of titles out there. I generally would lean towards the more popular ones because if they're popular, there's probably a good reason. And things that are a little bit more on the comedy side, which of course most lit RPGs do have that comedic bend. But one of the most popular ones right now is Dungeon Crawler Carl, which is a fantastic series. Highly recommended. The audiobook is spectacularly good on that. And so that would be the number one thing I'd recommend right now. If you're looking at more traditional, like something that's really much more heavily fantasy, then The Land, which is Alaron Kong's lit RPG series, it's been paused at book 9, which everybody's waiting for book 9 to come out. Not quite George Martin Game of Thrones length of time, but it's been a while and the people are waiting for that. But the first 8 books are right now, and it's really quite good. And the last one I'll throw out there, if you're looking for just like gonzo comedy stuff, then there's something called Creatures and Caverns, which is like heavily D&D riffed on that. And it is crude and rude, and it is hilarious. I mean, it's toilet home humor, it's juvenile, but I really think it brings me back to like when I was a teenager playing Dungeons and Dragons and some of the stupid stuff that used to happen back then. So those are kind of 3, which are quite different. One is really good and not really D&D, but it's a great lit RPG. One of them is very D&D heavy, and the other one is very fantasy heavy. And those are the 3 that I'd recommend to start looking at. But there's literally thousands that I could go over.
Yeah, I think I've heard Dungeon Crawling Carl, and I think I've heard of Creatures and Caverns for sure. I think Drop has listened to The Land.
I'm on the 2nd or 3rd book of The Land. No, like it's dope. My friend recommended it to me like 2 weeks ago, and I've been burning Audible credits through that boy.
Yeah, the Land is one of the first lit RPGs that I started with. And keep it in mind that lit RPGs are often just a version of isekai, and
right.
That's been around in anime for forever. But the Land was kind of like my first introduction to lit RPGs, and while I think there is a lot of more diversity now than when the Land first came out, I mean it really did a good job of giving a lot of publicity to lit RPGs at the time.
Yeah, and with this, like, because we met you guys at Gen Con, with where the time is at right now, do you guys have any kind of events or like conventions that you guys are planning to going forward?
Yeah, I mean, every year we try to do a couple of the large ones like Gen Con and the Gamma Expo, which is more of a business to business. It's not for fans; it's for retailers to mingle with the publishers. We've done Origins in the past, and we've done some larger anime conventions, although they typically don't play out as well with although we do anime RPGs, we don't find that we have quite the pull that we would at a game convention. But at every time, of course, we have to look at what's good for our production schedule, what's good for my family, and time with that. You only have a certain amount of time you can take off, and if I want to go on a trip with the family somewhere, then maybe that means I have to pass on a convention and I won't be able to go to, because it is trying to keep that work-life balance going on, and in the end, conventions can take up not only just physically being at the convention, but the prep work that goes into it and the preparation. And if you're running games, then all of that work that goes into it. So they're important, certainly, but it's not the end all be all. Kickstarter has allowed publishers to connect more directly with fans in a way that 30 years ago did not exist. You want to connect with the fans, you go to conventions. And now I can connect with fans in a different way. With a lot of the Discord, even that we do, have an active board there. So, yes, we always plan to do stuff, but every year is going to be a little bit in flux depending on kind of what the current situation looks like.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I will also say whenever we've done like anime like conventions and expos, I've usually seen something Anime 5e there. So that's something that I know is I see people, gravitating towards as well. I mean, we did when we were at a anime convention as well, our first time around. So but it's been I have to say we've loved what you guys have put out so far. Because we have the core rule book, and then we have the monsters a monster book that you guys had that we bought during Gen Con so far.
Yeah, wonderful. For the Monstrum Libri, which you have the Volume 1,
Yeah.
Volume 2 is just about the hit shells. So when I mentioned about the Beyonder Worlds expansion about to be fulfilled and hit in retail stores in November, Monstrum Libri Volume 2 is also one of the ones that we're releasing at the same time. So if you like the monsters that you see and looking for a little bit more variety, then Volume 2, for any of your listeners might be interested, November is when it hit shelves.
Do you have a favorite like fantasy monster within those two books?
Yeah, actually, it's funny that you mentioned that. I do. There was something that I created, which is we call it the chitinous jump shark. So it's a shark that has incredible leaping abilities, and it's armored with chitin. And so these are ridden by other underground underwater creatures, kind of like Sahuagin, which we have a slight variation of them. And so they ride around on these sharks that can leap like 30 feet out of the water, and they're armored sharks. Like these are just terrifying styles of creatures, and I think it's just hilarious. That's in Volume 2 that's coming out. And so this is one of the earlier ones I created. Even before I was going to do the Monstrum Libri, just as a digital expansion, I came out with these chitinous jump sharks as just the scariest, freaky things to have. And so that was one of my favorite things.
Awesome. That sounds great. Can't wait to see that. That sounds like it's going to be creepy for them. And like me being generally the designated dungeon master for a lot of these games, I love looking at monsters, so I know what to use against my players. So I can't wait to look for that for sure. I
got one question about the jump shark. Just one question. Does it jump? The jump shark has like legs, or is just like full body movement jumping up out of the water?
Yeah. It doesn't have legs. It can't walk around. We do have a different type of shark, which has legs and it can actually walk around and eat things, which is also terrifying. But no, the jump shark literally just has incredible jumping power. It leaps out of the water. You go to a marine, like Marineland or SeaWorld or something like that, and you'd see the dolphins doing tricks. Well, picture armored sharks jumping out of the water to eat you, and that's what these things are.
I'm cool. I don't need aggressive Shamu at me.
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, well, it sounds you're gonna get aggressive Shamu for sure at some point.
New idea.
I'm excited for what you guys have to come. I know you've talked about it a little bit, but do you want to officially plug the Kickstarters or anything that you guys got going on?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, as I mentioned, it's Soldier Loon, which is our Magical Girl box set. So it's a complete game in one. You don't need anything else. It comes in a traditional box. It has dice included. It has 6 different mini scenario adventures. It has character sheets. It has an NPC book, the rule book, and it's ready to go. You got your game screen in there. So it's a reasonable price at $40. I mean, you have one night of fun with a group of 6 people, and that would certainly pay for itself. But as an RPG that you could play it campaign oriented and for a longer period, or you could use them as one shots. And so that's doing quite well on Kickstarter. Still has 16 days to go, so a couple of weeks left before that runs out. And it's been next to Anime 5e. It was actually our fastest growing Kickstarter that we had at the beginning. So there was this pent up demand, I think, for people to wanting to play Magical Girls and Sailor Moon style games within TriStat. So I know that there's other magical girl games out there that could be wonderful for what they are, but within the BESM philosophy, TriStat games, we know that people are interested in that. And so it's a little different. Most of the time when we do Kickstarters, we have multiple products that we're kickstarting. So there might be a core book and a couple of expansions or multiple expansions, where this is just the one thing that we're doing, which is the Sailor Moon core or the Soldier Loon core RPG. So check it out if you have a chance.
Yeah, and I will make sure to put all those links in the description of the episode. But we also, I want to thank you, Mark, for coming on. It's been awesome having you here, especially since, as we said, we've done the Anime 5e, so it's been great to actually talk to somebody who, the mind of this kind of stuff.
Thank you. No, I really appreciate the time. It's very kind of you to invite me on, and I'm always happy to connect with people when they're curious more about the stuff we do. And if your listeners are interesting, then Dyskami.ca is our kind of a launching port, or at Dyskami with all of our socials, whether it's Instagram or X or Facebook. You can always find us there. So yeah, we're really, I love the opportunity to interact with people who are kind of interested in what we do. So thank you for taking the time to have me on today.
Yeah, for sure. And then, with all this other stuff coming out, you're more than welcome to come back on. You can even try to demo it in some kind of way if you want to. That is something that we would definitely love to see. But yeah, this has been awesome. This was Dyskami Games, Mark MacKinnon. Think that being said, that will be the conclusion of all this. So once again, thank you, Mark. Guys, if there's anything else you guys want to say.
It was awesome hearing from you. Keep up the great work, and I definitely can't wait to get back into our next adventure with one of your guys' systems.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. Love your system. And if you're ever in Cleveland, hit us up.
Yeah.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Hell yeah. Can't wait to play a Magic Girl. Do some Magic Girl Power Ranger shit.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks. And then we will talk to you all later. Bye.
Bye.
So long.
This was a Clash of Crits podcast. Theme song done by Shanovis, with additional music done by Hybrid Park. If you enjoyed our show, please give us a rating. See you in the next episode.